Hey everyone, welcome to Be a Better Human. My name is Ryan Shrines and I'm your host. I'm here with Luke Westlake and Justin Darling. And we're here tonight to talk about staying sane while staying informed. Is our discussion tonight, and obviously that's going to cover a host of different topics. Really excited for this episode. Luke and me have been obviously doing a lot of research over the last month and a half of all of the things that are going on in everyone's lives right now. So it's a very exciting time for us to host this type of discussion. Please feel free, as always, to comment in the feed. Luke's going to be monitoring the feed. So if you see him kind of wandering his eyes around the screen, as he does in each and every episode, he's going to be monitoring your questions. We really would like some open discussion here tonight. It is going to be a bit of a different episode that way. We would like to get to a lot of people's questions, um, and this is going to be good. So we're going to be talking about NLP. What is NLP? Well, that's neuro linguistic programming, and we're going to talk more about that. So NLP, persuasion, and influence on our world. We're also going to be talking about something called honest reporting, which we're definitely going to get into what that means. Knowing bias, self awareness, seeking falsification, and how to stay informed while maintaining mental health and clarity. So those are our topics for tonight. We're going to get through them as best as we can. That's a lot to cover, especially since I know there's a lot of different ways to look at this stuff. So let's get right into it. Our podcast is sponsored by Rode Microphones. Thank you so much from the guys at Rode. Again, as always, our disclaimer is that the advice that is here is non-medical advice. These are things that we have studied and things that have worked for us. Please take from it what you will, and hopefully it works for you as well. Again, this podcast is real and raw as it is each and every week. And so we're going to talk about things and we're going to get to the truth tonight for real. And one of the things I also wanted to mention is that me and Luke have sort of established a weekly schedule for those of you that want to tune in on a regular basis. Barring that we're both available each and every week, we plan to do Mondays and Thursdays. So this is our Monday episode. So please tune in this coming Thursday. Luke, who do we have this coming Thursday?
We have Leslie, Justin's lovely partner, and she's with the Sweaty Successful Mums, and we're going to be talking a lot about energy, EMFs, and a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be great. I'm really excited for that one too. So tune in on Thursday for that. Make sure you follow us on any of our platforms. We're on Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We go live on all of them except Instagram at this point. So please follow us on one of our platforms, or all of our platforms for that matter, so that you can stay up to date with all of the live feeds that we're going to be doing. So welcome to episode 6. Let's get into this. So for those of you that are not aware, we have talked about it on and off. Luke has been working with a gentleman named Chris Wiley. Luke worked with Chris when he was going through some stuff, and Chris really helped Luke in a lot of ways. And one of the things that he used was NLP. And so I know Luke's really passionate about NLP. I know Justin, you are as well. So let's get into this, guys, and let's talk about this. So the topic is NLP, persuasion and influence on our world. Why don't we start with you, Luke, and why don't you just give us some background as to how NLP helped you in your life?
Right. Yeah, NLP, neurolinguistic programming, is it's something that's been used for decades. Media has been using it unbeknownst to a lot of us, and we're going to cover a lot more of that later on in the episode. But for me, we have basically hypnotists, as Chris would call. Some of them are vicious hypnotists, and we might have Chris jump on the call at some point here. He might jump in. But we basically have hypnotists that range from our parents to our teachers to media to celebrities. And, some of them are on our side. Some of them aren't so much.
I was just going to say, not all of them are bad.
Yeah, no. It's one of those, NLP is one of those technologies that can be used for good and it can be used for bad. It's extremely helpful using it for good. In my case, I was basically, dealing with a lifetime of anxiety. I had a lot of depression that I was dealing with. And throughout about 10 years of different types of talk therapy, I learned a lot about myself over the 10 years. But at the end of the day, I kept saying, okay, when do I not feel anxious, or when do I feel better? And long story short, I met through a mutual friend and colleague. I met Chris, and he was doing the NLP stuff and doing brain mapping and all that kind of stuff. And in one 45-minute session, 45-minute session doing NLP, this is a couple of years ago. It's actually on my Facebook and my YouTube and on Chris's Facebook because we live streamed it. Um, he had basically done a 40-minute session with me. And in that 40-minute session, he completely got rid of all of the anxiety and the depression that I was trying to deal with for about 10 years. And it's not to say that, I don't have times in my life where there's stress or anxiety that comes up, but I like to explain it in terms of you can learn how to climb stairs. Like my son is learning how to climb stairs right now, and luckily, learning how to get rid of and deal with anxiety is a lot quicker than a 2-year-old learning how to climb stairs. And so once you learn the steps, once you practice it a few times, it's not like you never have to, it's not like you approach a set of stairs and you're magically transported to the top. You have to go through the steps. And that's what I do every time I'm in a situation where I'm dealing with anxiety or depression. But once you know those steps and you become fluent in them, all of a sudden you don't really think about it. It's just part of your daily routine. So using neurolinguistic programming, I was basically, for lack of a better term, using poor planning. And I'd become, just over a lifetime, and I could probably go into several reasons why I had become so good at it, but I become extremely good at making bad plans for the future. So there would be something in mind that I would want, and that's not what I was actually focusing on. I was focusing on all of the things, all of the obstacles. I was focusing on all of the alternatives that were, a negative sort of outcome based alternative. And I became really good at making very big pictures visually in my mind. And I was focusing on them. And neurolinguistic programming is basically, one of the aspects of it is the ability to take control of how you're making these mental pictures in your mind, and how you're able to focus on certain, like you'll see, when even while I'm talking right now, my eyes are moving in different directions, whether I'm recalling or whether I'm trying to create. So different, we store images, and we store images differently in our mind, in terms of like some of us will see the future out in front of us and the past behind us when we recall, or look to the future. Or some, it will be, past on one hand, and present and future on the other hand.
Yeah, I think
So you're
really.
basically, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think everybody can relate to that. Like when you're talking to someone, and I do this all the time, when you're talking to someone, all of a sudden you don't realize it, but you start looking up to the right or up to the
Yeah.
left,
Yeah.
right? And we're talking about it consciously now, so people are now going to be aware of it when they do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you do it. Everyone does it every day, and they just don't realize it.
Yeah, yeah, and so, when you're making plans for the future, and you're focusing on the obstacles, or what, like, say, the worst possible outcome for something is, and for you, if you have something that's sitting, if you're the type of person that puts something in the future in front of you, for example, and you're basically focusing on something that's like life size, like you're associated in this, like you're looking through your own eyes into something that's big and bright and bold and loud and powerful. You're going to, like, your brain is going to look at that no different from what's actually happening in reality. And that's all going to trigger different emotions and different stress and anxiety and different feelings in the body, and those pictures and the feelings in the body are going to be associated together. And if you think about it, something that's big and visually prominent, it's going to have a major effect on your emotion, and it's going to have a major effect on your body, and in terms of what your brain is classifying as important and what it wants to focus on.
Right.
So you can become really good at making big, bad, nasty pictures out in front of you that really get in the way. It's like when you're driving a car, you don't want to look at the obstacles that you're trying to avoid. You want to look on the open road. And
Right.
essentially, a lot of us become really good at making really big, bad pictures of things that we don't want and putting them right in our future. And so something that Chris helped me with is taking that big bad thing that I don't want and looking at like through different questions and a little bit of discussion, without prying at all. But you Chris is the master at this kind of stuff, so he will within a natural conversation figure out where you're putting things that are in the past and in the future. He'll figure out where things where things are that influence your emotion the greatest, and he'll take things that are anxiety inducing and he'll put it, he'll help you take something and like shrink it down or white it out, or different
Amazing.
techniques that can really take the attention and the heaviness of a visual. And say there's something that you always forget doing and you're constantly sort of looking back. You basically would want to take a bad plan and put it in a place where you're going to forget it, and you're going to take all of the things that you want to work on and you want to basically create those in front of you, or wherever you
Yeah, you
want.
want to visualize it in front of you,
Yeah, exactly.
for sure. Yeah, because you're
So
looking forward a lot of the time, right? So,
yeah, and it
so
depends on it really depends on the person. It's like, generally speaking, people put stuff in the future in front of them and in the past behind them. But it's essentially, the idea is that you want to figure out where these places are, take the bad memories out, put good memories or good plans in, and you want to rewire what emotions are attached to that kind of thing. So you
so
can.
you mentioned emotion.
Mhm.
So talking about all this, there's some people who are going to be watching this and they're going to be going, okay, well, this is all great, but I'm still not quite following along. Now, when uh, we talk about NLP in these ways, and we talk about visualizing positive things in front of us. And I know you touched on the media and politics, and there's some people who use this stuff all the time for negative purposes. Um, Emotion. How does you brought up a good point, which is anxiety and things like that. I have some people in my own family who suffer from anxiety, and um, through all of the research that I've been doing with you and the people who I've connected with, like you and Chris and so on and Justin, we've talked about um, a number of different things, including how NLP influences anxiety. And I think that's something a lot of people out there can relate to right now, is anxiety and depression and those types of feelings. So while they may not understand fully yet what NLP is, you know, how can they, further, taking what you just said about visualizing positive things in front of you, taking it one step further, just to excuse me, specifically focus on people's emotions and how they feel. What are some of the things that people that suffer from anxiety and depression and things like that, uh, what's some of the things that they can do? Obviously we want to get Chris on at some point and do more of an in-depth talk about this, but just before we get into some of the things that are influencing our world, what about people's emotions when they're watching some of this news and watching some of this stuff? What can they do to mitigate that in terms of NLP?
Well, you'll notice that a lot of the what's going on in the media, they're eliciting an emotional response, generally fear. And like it's like basically if I say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, bouncing on a beach ball, like all of a sudden your mind goes directly towards that. So they're essentially using NLP to hijack, like there's a bunch of stuff we'll get into here in a minute, but they're using different techniques and different technologies to hypnotize you in real time while you're watching TV or you're watching on your computer. I'll pull up the patent and show you in a little bit, but they're basically using these hypnotic suggestions and technologies to to hijack where you're putting these pictures, and they know that with these pictures you're going to associate it with a feeling. And something that not a lot of us understand or were ever taught is that again, when we associate these pictures and these feelings, there's feeling is moving. Like there's a movement to feeling. Like if like you have butterflies in your stomach, there's, if you look at it, or you have anxiety in your chest, if you stop and you focus on it, you'll notice that it's actually moving in a direction, whether it's forwards or backwards or clockwise or counterclockwise. And interestingly, anytime that in the past I was having, because I have Crohn's, anytime that I would have a what's called a Crohn's flare up, where my body would start getting into basically a feedback loop where my immune system started attacking myself, attacking my own body, is that every single time, and I don't know if it'll show up, but like in my sternum and in my chest, it was like this always started with this little feeling, and I always noticed it right away. And something that Chris helped me get a hold of was that, okay, notice what way the feeling is spinning, and try and actually spin it more in that direction to make it worse. Because if you can get control of it to make it worse, you can actually get control of it to make it better. So like for me, it was spinning forwards, right? You can see that I'm constantly doing this forwards.
Right.
So for me, he said, okay, let's take that feeling and start spinning it forwards a little faster and a little faster. How does that feel? Well, it feels terrible. Okay, well, let's try actually just like spinning it forward a little slower, a little slower, a little slower, and then all of a sudden start to spin it backwards as opposed to forwards. And it's almost like magic in that you can get a hold of that feeling while it's in progress, like while it's actually happening.
That's powerful
And you
stuff.
can, yeah, and you can reverse that. And since he taught me that a few years ago now, a couple of years ago, it's not like I've never had that feeling start, but I am immediately notice it.
Right.
And what I'll do is like it's almost like grabbing it and calibrating. So I'll spin it a little faster forward, make it a little worse. But it happens really early on. So it's not like I'm not setting off my immune system, but I'll trigger it to get a little worse just so I know that I have a hold of it. And then I'll just slowly breathe, start to spin it slower and slower, and then eventually spin it backwards. And after spinning it backwards for, just literally a few seconds, it goes away. And then, then at that point, I'm looking at, okay, well, what am I focusing on in terms of, my mental awareness? What are the pictures that I'm looking at in front of me? So that's when that's generally, again, this has not even happened in the last couple of years, but I would always notice that whenever I had that feeling, there were certain negative pictures that I was creating in my mind and focusing on them. So it's just, if you can learn the techniques of, taking something that's big and bad and in front of you and getting rid of it, and then popping up something that motivates you or that you want to move towards, while at the same time spinning that feeling in a different direction, you
Right.
can actually, you can take over really, really intense emotions and really, really, intense anxiety and intense, like you can get tunnel vision on focusing on something that's so negative. Like, take, for example, right now, there's a lot of people who are focusing on negative news, or there's a lot of people focusing on like the worst case scenario for them or their family in terms of health or in terms of financial stability, that kind of thing. So
Right.
people are really good right now at focusing that attention on the worst case, and and building that feeling, because
Right.
they don't have control of it, or they're not aware that they have the control over it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's
So
and that's
that's.
that's an important thing. So that, and I want to just touch on that before we go any further. So so based on what you're saying, we're talking about, if people are not, I mean, I'm aware of this, you're aware of this, Justin is, Chris, there's obviously a number of people who are aware of this, but now that we're letting everyone know what this is and how powerful it can be, people are going to start to realize that if you're not aware of this, if you're completely unaware and all you're doing is you're sitting on your couch at home and you're watching the news, or you're watching, you're reading the paper, whatever it is. So what you're saying essentially is that people who are unaware are allowing people who are very aware, who are very trained, who have people who are very trained, even NLP masters in some cases, that are training them how to speak, what to say, when to say it, all of that stuff, to create pictures in people's minds. And it's true, we do. We're watching the news and they say something about, something happening, and immediately we picture ourselves there, or we picture, we picture something, we picture what that building might look like, or
Mhm.
whatever, and I think that's something we all do subconsciously without even consciously knowing it. And if you're right, and you are, if people are not aware of what NLP is and are not aware that by someone creating pictures in your mind, it is creating either positivity or negativity. It depends on what exactly the pictures are depicting. But I think um, it's very important for people to now become aware, because if this is true, which it is, then obviously people are unaware of the fact that by simply watching negative stuff or by reading negative stuff, they're creating a situation that, like you said, they have control over. You have control over whether you watch it or read it or visualize it as a result. And I think that that's the key here that we need to pull out of this piece, is that people need to be aware that negativity right now, a lot of negativity or positivity, depending on what you're looking at, is being influenced on you and your life in your mind. And the
Mhm.
more and more and more and more of that you continue to subscribe to, the worse and worse and worse and worse it's going to get. And it is a big reason why Be a Better Human is here right now, and why we felt the need to rush this thing to get it up and rocking for people, is because there is a lot of negativity out there, and we needed something that's a voice of positivity. So on that note, on a positive note, you can control this. This is something
Mhm.
that you can control. Turn off the TV for a while. Start going on and unfollowing groups and people on Facebook who are negative Nellies, because that's that's what just by simply scrolling through your Facebook feed or whatever it is, and seeing these negative things that people are sharing from these various sources, which may or may not be credible, and that's a whole other thing we'll get into later. But it's just, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. The point is that it's negatively affecting you, and is that what you really really want? Can you really really control what's going on with that piece of news? No, you can't. It's already done, it's gone. And sure, it's good to know, but for what reason? Right now, if you have anxiety issues, it's not helping you, it's actually hurting you. And you
Mhm.
can easily take control right now today by simply just refocusing your attention, right, Luke, on something
Mhm.
that's positive, and put it out right out in front of you, right out in the open, and go, yep, that's what I want. If for anyone that follows me on Facebook, I've been posting videos of me and my daughter going live. My father nicknamed her DJ Peanut, and I don't know if that's going to stick or not. But anyway, there's a long story behind why we call her Peanut. But anyway, so but I'm putting this stuff out there because I think that that's more. That's, to me, that's more important. It's more important to share the positive things that are going on in my life with the people who I love and my friends and colleagues, than it is to put the negative things out there. And trust me, there's lots of news articles, there's lots of things, there's lots of breaking news things going on that we're all aware of. So, sharing that's cool for some people. But I think that, this many weeks in, there's only so much of that a lot of people can handle. There's someone in every person's life that suffers from this. There's like I said, I know people in my immediate family that suffer from anxiety and depression and all this stuff. And you're not helping them by forwarding this stuff on your feed, because they're seeing it, and it's just perpetuating this fear and this anxiety, and it's putting it again right directly in front of them where they can't miss it. And I'm not saying don't share news. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, make sure that you're aware of the visualizations that you're creating out there. And sometimes it's better to create a new narrative. And we'll get into that. We'll get into what it means to create narratives and all of that, and narrative journalism and so on. But that being said, let's get into the heart of this, and so we can kind of move through these topics here. So, as far as NLP persuasion is concerned right now, with what's going on in the world, why don't we throw it to Justin? Justin, do you want to sort of explain, or actually maybe both of you can have a discussion about it? Let's talk about, what people are subscribing to right now. That's, that they're visualizing. I mean, I know obviously everybody's watching the news. Everybody's watching our we're in Canada. For those of you tuning in from outside the country, we're in Canada. So we have a prime minister here. And obviously there's prime ministers in other countries, and there's presidents in some countries. And so there's a lot of political leaders out there right now. Could be mayors, could be, health ministers, could be anybody speaking. And all their opinions are valid. Everything they're saying is valid. They're bringing us the best information they possibly can at the time, based on what they're getting, from people. That's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is, how is that affecting you? How is that NLP? So that you can be informed that you are subscribing to NLP, and you can be conscious of it so that you can control it. And I'd like for you guys to sort of let's enlighten people as to how is this being used, and how is it being used to affect us in the forms of media and politics that we're seeing right now. Why don't we roll into this? Who wants to start?
I can say something on that. So Trudeau, he's actually very magnificent at this stuff. So if you watch him talk, or when you watch him talk next, he drops his tone slightly, and he starts talking in a very simple monotone when he wants to make more of a relative hypnotic suggestion with his speech. And like the way that he does it, or I can't even think about the example that I did, but if you're watching his speeches, like watch for his, where it immediately drops into rhythmic pattern of talking. And what that is basically dropping people into a state of hypnosis. And something like to touch on with NLP and this stuff, just to touch on some of like the anxieties that people face. I think the main thing, the first thing that you should do is connect your physiology. So like relaxing your body physically, relaxing your pelvic floor, which is your P muscle, for those of you that don't know what that is, and relaxing your jaw. Because when that stimulation starts in your body, even the feeling that Luke felt in his stomach, that's in his physiology. And often, especially with all this COVID stuff going around, like people are being ripped out of their bodies just in terms of where they're giving their attention and their focus. And I think connecting with the body is the first step, and calming the body down so that it's not in that chronic state of stress, which most people are in most of the time. Like most people hold on to little micro tensions in their body. But going back to the idea of hypnosis, like how is it being used in society? I think each different government is handling the problem differently. So like if you look at the Canadian political spectrum, Trudeau has to, like, just by the nature of like most of the public don't necessarily trust the government. Like this is not new in Canadian politics, and the government doesn't necessarily trust us. Like, so they, I think, had to make it seem that this was going to be so much more worse than it was. And they have, I believe, perpetuated the hypnotic suggestion of that. Like, we are managing this thing, I believe, incredibly well as a society. And
I agree.
and like we're
Better than I
doing
think they ever thought we would, for sure.
yeah. And I think the nature of how that is used in Canadian politics is like when they start to subtly threaten more force being used in the country, like even in terms of people getting ticketed and this type of stuff, like um, it's fascinating to see how like the public responds to that. And it's, each country is going to be different. Like
Yes,
each different political spectrum is going to be different. Each different um, national narrative is going to be different. So like each one needs to be handled differently. And I think Trudeau is just a mouthpiece for other people making decisions, which is a whole other topic. But like he's
yeah,
simply presenting to the public and saying, "Don't worry, you're going to be safe," reassuring them, making sure they're going to be okay. And I, that goes back into NLP. It's like they have all these. Luke talked about the balls, spinning balls in their body that are spinning with anxiety,
of course.
and the main thing that you need to do in terms of all this anxiety, and like I watch Trudeau because I'm interested in how he's hypnotizing the public, like, which is kind of amusing. But like, I don't, I appreciate what he's saying and these such things, but like he's very good with his words,
Hmm.
and he's a magician in his own in that way. And I think he just represents the leader, that
The leader role. Yeah.
that is just an identity in today's world.
Well, there's a
Like,
team, right? There's a team. Everybody has
of
to
course,
recognize that. Anyone who's a business owner knows they have a team, right? I mean, whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, or a municipal government, they're corporations, they're businesses, right? The corporation, well, I mean, we're in London, Canada, the corporation of the city of London, right? Like these are businesses, and they have a team like no different than any other business. And and then the media is the first one to attack them when the business doesn't make money and is and is in the hole, right? Um, for anyone that's old enough that's watching, they remember, the times in the past, including Trudeau's father, when, there's all kinds of money issues. And so then people get all negative about that. So it's a business nonetheless. And you have a team, right? I have our family, we have a business, and I have a team of people, right? Before we came on here, Justin, you were talking to me about, hey, so what have you been up to? You've been selling some equipment, what was my response, right? Is like, no, I have a team of people working with me, right? So just to clarify what you're saying for people, he's got a team of people behind him who are helping him to understand how to speak and how to create the hypnosis that he's doing. And not all of it's necessarily negative, right? Like that's the thing is, I mean, I've said it before in the podcast, I'm Switzerland, like I'm not on one side or the other here necessarily, but it's it's not about that. It's about understanding what's going on, because it's really going on, whether you want to believe it or not. It's really happening. And whether it's good or bad is irrelevant. You just need to know it's happening, because if you're unaware, then you're subject to whatever it is. You just have to accept it. Well, you don't if you're aware of it. So I think that that's what part of what you're speaking to is that whether whatever side of the fence you're on with our prime minister or with your leader in your country, it doesn't really matter. That part doesn't matter. You can't necessarily control that this minute, today. But what you can control is the fact of whether or not you're consciously aware of what is going on while they're speaking to you, through the television or through the internet or whatever, right? And I think that's the point that we're trying to get across here, right? So people just need to be aware of that. And is that sort of, sorry, not to jump in there, but is that sort of what you're trying to say?
for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And um yeah, so like it's used in all forms of media as well. Like the thing I find with the algorithm world of social media is the more controversial and low level of attention required, um, the more traction it gets on these networks.
Hmm.
And simply because I think more eyes watch it, and then more eyes comment on it, and more eyes talk about it, and more people engage with it naturally. And that isn't and what I think that perpetuates the narrative of across our culture is that we live in a polarized world where as soon as we meet someone, they're either on my team or they're not. And I think that is the biggest danger in terms of a narrative that exists that is permeating our society. And this is done through the big social media networks. Like this is done through Facebook. I
Yeah.
would say mostly so. Instagram is probably next, and YouTube's on there as well, because it's just pure, like, algorithmically, this is what you're pushed in, and we get pushed in particular directions.
Yeah.
And that is not what our society is like. Our society is not go up to people and say, are you on my side or are you not on my side, and have these black and white things. And like that those narratives are the narratives that created what happened in Mao's China and what happened in the Soviet Union and what happened in Nazi Germany. It was them versus us.
Right.
And
No, you're right. You're right. 100%.
that's a very, very dangerous narrative that is being played out on our social networks, and it's happening, and it's happening subtly, so from a hypnotic standpoint, because it's just a suggestion, right?
Yeah, no,
Like,
you're
and
you're
that's one of the
100%
main component of hypnosis, and hypnosis was a branch kind of within NLP stuff. So they're constantly repeating a stimulus and constantly making you look at the same thing and in the same opinion. And to what degree can these algorithms shape and move people's opinions? Like I look at like from a privacy standpoint, we all know that we don't have any privacy. Like we're on Zoom right now. Like the Chinese government can get this data of our voices. Like any government in the G8 can give this.
Well, I mean, we're streaming on YouTube and Facebook,
well, of course,
and
yeah.
you know what I mean. So, I mean, at the end of the day,
well, and I even
what it
just
is.
from the standpoint of like we can, our microphones can be tapped in at any point. If
Absolutely.
somebody wanted to hack into Ryan's life and listen to Ryan and watch Ryan 24/7 out of his devices, his wife's device, and other devices in their home, like you could basically have full access to Ryan's life. And anybody who has a relative degree in understanding how to hack things can do that. And it has been speculated that our governments have access to this, as much as our government is kind of playing the guise of like, oh, well, we might have to track into people's device location to figure out if they've been social distancing or not. And I'm like, you're just like pretending to tell the public that you don't track into their
this is
it's
true.
Hilarious.
Yeah, this is true. I can't mention any names, but I spoke recently to someone who's involved in a study about what we're going through right now, very intense study, and they use cell phone data to track exactly who he came into contact with, and that person had been to China 3 times, and so on and so on. So yes, they are absolutely using that data for sure. There's no question. So that being said, I mean, I've noticed I can speak. I always like to speak from my own personal experience, and in this case, my experience is watching our leaders, and trust me, I U.S., Canada, all the leaders. I had a very different perspective of them previous to now. Like, and I think a lot of people do, good or bad, doesn't matter. I think times like this bring certain things out in people, right? So what I've noticed is that certain leaders, I don't need to mention any names, people can figure out who this is certain leaders will go up and they'll start talking, they'll be speaking, or they'll be answering someone's question, and then someone from the media will just come out with this very blatantly obvious negative question, and it doesn't matter how many ways they answer it and how many different talks, just keep asking it, keep steering the narrative to this negativity and this visualization, like Luke was saying, right? Because it doesn't matter how positive the message was. We're going to give everybody in Canada, $2,000, or not everybody, but we're going to create all these stimuluses. We're going to help you out. Don't worry. We're going to keep the border open for commerce, so we can bring in food, and we're going to, all essential services. So there's all this positive stuff that's talked about. Sure, there's a couple negative things, but that's just part of life. You can't, it's yin and yang. That's why there's a yin and a yang behind me. You have to have both. You can't have just positive. It doesn't exist. That if life was only positive, you wouldn't know it as positive because there'd be no negative. So the reality is that sure, there's a few negative things, but people are doing what they can, again, as the information is coming along. And I just find it very interesting that I would argue most of the questions coming from the news media in many of the countries is negative. It is not only negative, it puts the person speaking in a position where they have to, whether they do it or not, they feel like they have to defend themselves or defend the position of the people who they're speaking for. Because as you said, several of them are more of a talking head situation. They're the person who's been put in charge of speaking on behalf of the team, right, of people in parliament or in whatever country you're in. And I just find it very interesting that when you see people phone in, like in the early days when our prime minister was speaking, people were phoning in online, and some people would phone in with questions, and they would be like, legitimate positive questions, not positive, but like inquisitive questions, like, hey, what can I expect about this, and what can I expect? And but yet, whatever I hear, it's like, it's so and so from such and such, news channel. It's usually something where they're picking on them, or they're being real negative, like, how come you didn't do this sooner, or how come you, and it's all valid. Again, I say it in every episode, everybody's opinion is valid, all good. But why is that constantly the narrative, right? And I think that speaks to what you were saying, Luke, right, about this constant perpetuation of negativity right directly in front of you, because you're sitting there, you're not watching the person speaking from the news media, you're watching the figure in front of you, this person who's been elected to be this figure for your country. You're watching this person directly in front of you, which means you're focused on it, and you're hearing this negative thing that, let's face it, most of the political leaders out there, again, they have a team. They're not just going to go off the cuff and start speaking to some of these things because they don't know. They have ministers here in Canada. We have ministers of education, ministers of health. There's people who are in charge of some of the decisions that are being made, having all the reports and all the things. So, what was good about our government in the early days of this thing was they would refer to those people, right? Like the premier of Ontario would say, well, I'm not sure, so I'm going to bring on this, minister of health or whoever. And that was good because at least the person speaking had firsthand knowledge of the decisions that were being made and the information that they had access to. But I think that, again, I go back to, I think that the part of the issue here, guys, is that, what I'm seeing is this constant drive of this negative image being driven. And I just don't think that makes sense after how many weeks, right? Like, I understand why it's happening, but I think at some point, again, going back to what you both said, I think at some point we have to start turning that off. Like, at some point it's, we get it, right? And by continuing to embed this into our visualization, into our mind, what could it possibly do that's good for us as a society? And Justin, you're totally right. Like, we're totally not that kind of people, right? We're not those kind of people. And I said it in previous episodes where I was in the grocery store, an hour before this podcast, and I saw it again. Where people are kind of looking at other people coming too close to them, like, oh, and it goes back to what I said in that other episode about people didn't, know that person that you're being all negative about. They didn't make this happen, right? Like, none of us wanted this. None of us want this happening. So you have to just have that empathy and just remember, like, everybody's different, and no one's changed. We're all still the same people. You just have to be, again, not only aware of the NLP and the persuasion that is causing you to fear other people coming near you, And there's legitimate reasons why you are fearing it. I totally agree. But you just have to be aware of it. You have to be in control, right, Luke? You have to be in control of
Yeah.
this,
Yeah,
right? I think that's
exactly.
the important thing, because if you're not in control, then you're out of control. And do you really want to be out of control? I don't. I don't want to be out of control of my mind, right? How many, uh, you put you in hospitals for that, right? Like, you don't want to be out of control of your mind. You want to be in control of your mind. But in order to do that, you have to be informed. You have to understand what's going on in your mind and why it's going on in your mind. And that's why we're having this discussion, because we all feel here in this on this episode that this is all very, very important. Let's just jump into, Luke, is there anything on that end that you wanted to add? Because I would like to jump into we've kind of touched on honest reporting, I guess, a little bit in what I'm saying, but I want to jump into what me and you talked about with regards to narrative journalism. Because
Well, just a little brief segue. What I've seen for quite a few years now is just the divide and conquer sort of narrative. So it's one of those things where it's the us versus them, or you versus your opponent kind of thing. And right now, while we need to come together, and while we need to be focusing on the positive, because as most people understand by now, is anxiety and stress and fear actually really, really undermine your immune system and your body's ability to fight something like a virus. So it's really important for us, just physically, health wise, not to be stewing in fear, not to be stewing in anxiety. And it also doesn't really help us as humanity, as a collective, to be divided so aggressively. And if you look at the news media, especially, like they're taking a crisis situation and they're politicizing it, and they're really, really driving home the divide and conquer kind of thing. And like, you have to be like in agreement with them, and if you don't, like, it's literally come down to the point where they're like essentially telling people to rat out their family members, their friends, if they go out for a walk. Like, there's different things that are happening right now that just are further driving that wedge between uh you know it's not like a left and right thing. It's far greater.
yeah,
It's not just a
and not
left right
necessarily for
thing.
a walk, but like, if they were to for non-essential reasons, if they're out doing things and whatever. I agree. I mean, we even have in London, Canada, here where we are, we even have a hotline for it, right? Like a phone number you can call. So I mean, it's yeah, definitely. So
I think I was
what's
gonna
that, Justin?
say, like, I think there's fine lines with this, right? So like, I know some gym owners who are now transitioning their gym into the online space.
I
So,
know
and
some too.
they're also trying to pay their employees, right? So they're doing everything that they can and to run an online business with their employees, right, to keep them employed and keep paying them. And does that mean that they're at location working, like, as a trainer? And then is it an essential service, or is that an online business, right? And to what degree are we allowed to play the lines of that, right? And these things are completely undiscussed politically. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even if is me selling online coaching, am I not allowed to do that right now? Right? Like, even though there's no physical contact and there's a ton of people doing it, don't get me wrong, but like, and like, I do it, don't get me wrong, but like, to what degree do we dial that in? And those are really important, nuanced discussions which are not being told. We're not having the narrative of those things. We're
Mhm.
saying you're either breaking the rules or you're not breaking the rules. And like, and that those are very fascinating things. Like, to imagine a totalitarian society that requires you to keep your cell phone on your body the whole time, and if you ever go within 6 feet of another little dot on a GPS map, you get a fine. Like, That's what's so fucked up about this. Like it's the most insane thing. And
Well, I think people don't think it's insane because they think at some point it's going to end and life is going to go back to normal, right?
well,
And I think that's
that's
why,
you don't even know that that might not even be the case.
yeah,
And
well,
those are
that's just it, right? That's I mean,
yeah.
I think that's the part that people fear though, right? Like, so the denial is that not that the, a lot of that is internal fear that, it could be true. And so I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that some people want to manifest positivity by denying the fact that it could be true and therefore it may not be true because you are what you believe. However, there are, none of us are, taking over the positions in which the people are deciding whether this is going to happen or not anytime soon. So it's, there's only so much we can do. And if we are going to do anything, we have to do it together as a society. Right.
Well,
And
I think it's just like super important right now. This is where the whole censorship thing comes in, and like you said, these nuanced conversations aren't really happening. Aside from shows like this, in the mainstream, long form, nuanced discussion is not allowed. You get your 15-second soundbite. You get everything super edited. Everything is out of context, or context is made up, or context is sort of created around a narrative. So that's, again, like, the whole idea of like, do we go back to work now that everything is looking a lot better than what we sort of anticipated, or the quote unquote what the powers that be were anticipating is it's quite a lot less severe. But at the end of the day, like, do we all just get up and go back to work tomorrow? Well, like, these are nuanced conversations that we need to have. And if it's left to, well, if, like, it's either black or white, like either we are on lockdown 100% or we're back to work 100%. Like, there's a lot more nuance to that. Like, I've heard different ideas in terms of, hey, maybe this week you're allowed like a sister family or a sister friend, that you can, from, for the next week, that you're able to sort of break the quarantine. So, say for example, if you and I, Ryan, became, this a group that you and I could go back and forth and visit each other, and maybe for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks that we do that, and everyone does that, they have one family or one group of people that they're able to, go back and forth. We look at that and we go, okay, is that going to spike incidents of infection? Is that going to spike incidents of death? So like, I'm not saying that that's the great idea or the way forward. It might be. I'm not saying yes or no, but again, it's like a nuanced conversation that if you are not allowed to even approach, and again, like, going back to the hypnosis and the NLP that the media use, a lot of people sort of react on emotion, and
sure.
if you're not aware of it, then
Yeah.
it can be really hijacked really easily,
Oh, for sure.
especially if people are eating a certain way, and there's, microbiome stuff that's going on, and like, all of these systems that are really difficult for our human bodies, the antennas that we are, to really deal with all the cell phone and the microwave radiation and Wi-Fi and all this other stuff that really confuses the body on different levels.
Yeah, on the cellular level, for sure.
Yeah, and your gut microbiome, and all of these things that Justin can go into way more detail about. But these are putting people at a distinct disadvantage. And you add that, the toxins in the food, the toxins in society in general, and you have like really easily controlled people who all you have to do is pluck the emotion strings, and you can play them like a harp. So
Yeah.
it like,
Well,
and that's,
we've
yeah,
all
and it's, like, so you can use something like painting a picture of of not being able to go see your loved one as they, take their last gasp of air in a hospital. And like, even that will probably evoke a certain emotion or a certain visual for people.
Yeah.
And like I use that sort of, carefully, like try not to go to too much detail, because I don't want to elicit that kind of emotion. But just as an illustration, how easy it is with a single sentence to really hijack somebody's emotions, where you have someone who doesn't have any awareness of that and has no strategy for mitigating it or dealing with it or becoming aware of it or countering it in real time.
Mhm.
Then you get a whole bunch of people, and you'll notice this on social media posts, is that when people go off on, like going back to work or staying home or flattening the curve, they go off on, different EMF wireless technologies. They go off on, XYZ, whether it's, on one hand or the other, the left
Sure.
or the right, or, any sort of political,
Yeah, people get fired.
perspective. It doesn't matter. Like, we all do it. Is that when we're having those emotional responses, we're not able to have serious, nuanced conversations.
Sure.
And that's the biggest reason that we have to be anti-censorship. That right there is the biggest reason, because we can't have, like, none of the stuff would be an issue if censorship was such a big deal. If China wasn't censoring things the way that they were, we'd all have sort of, like, I don't think it ever would have got out the way that it did. But the fact that our leaders and different globalists, alphabet soups out there, they don't share they have all this information on us, but they're not sharing that information with us. So if we had, sorry,
Dude,
Justin.
it's like the other thing to touch in on this too is like data, right? So it's like, whose data is that?
Mhm.
Is it Luke's data, or is it Facebook's data, or is it
Right.
Google's data, or is it the government's data? Because like, we could literally take the society that we have now, say that's my data. Now it's mine to sell to an advertiser, not Facebook's to sell to an advertiser. So it's
Yeah.
fascinating when we
We changed
start
the game.
to think about these things from an ownership standpoint, and what companies are even taking over the world, in a sense of things, taking over the world right now. Like, so the fascinating thing when you think about social media and these telecommunications companies, especially when we talk about like the implementation of more like 5G and this type of thing, is what if we took it away? What if we took social media away? I remember when social media went down for like 4 hours one afternoon, and people were like, I heard a story about like people sitting in the subway like freaking out because they couldn't get on their social media, like holding their phone trying to load on to Facebook. Like, it was the most insane thing. So like, what if we got rid of Facebook in like right now? Like, Facebook owns the world right now because it can't be turned off. Like, if it got turned off, it would get so much worse. Things would get so bad because people would freak out because we don't have this new platform.
Well, it's an emotional connection too, right? People don't realize it, but they, some people literally, my father, just to speak to your point, my father, it says, or my father, one of my family anyway, says all the time, they go, if it wasn't, if it wasn't for Facebook, just because everybody's life is busy, we'd miss all these little moments in your daughter's life. But yet, we put these things on Facebook on our stories and they see it all, right? So if you're right, if just to break it right down to something simple, if if you turn that off, all that goes away too, right? And I think that there's people out there that are watching this that that would dramatically affect them for sure. But knowing that that same content, to your point, that same content is now out there and is now being used by people for things that are definitely against my privacy, right? And they're profiting from it, and I am not being compensated at all. And that's definitely a whole other podcast, guys. But at the end of the day, let's sort of refocus here. And I just want to read one thing just to kind of get further into this honest reporting thing. So I stumbled someone who we're going to hopefully have towards the end of the month on the podcast sent me a copy of her documentary, and and we're just finalizing her, so we'll be announcing her shortly. But she sent me a copy of her documentary, and within her documentary, she had an excerpt in there of her phoning up someone because she had done an article with them about what she does, and she had sent them all the facts, and she had published her work in a journal, and she sent them copies of it, and of course when the piece came out, it was completely wrong. It was completely the opposite. It said that her stuff had never been published. It said that she wasn't credited, and and she got a hold of the editor from this particular publication, they went on to say that, just so this is, it's all based on how the person writes the story. And she goes, well, what do you mean? This is the news. Like you're reporting, this is journalism. You're reporting something. Should be the truth. You should be fact checking. And he goes, well, that's not what we do. The writer does that. And that's part of long form, narrative journalism. And I took that little excerpt from her thing, and I went and did a bunch of research on this. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from Wikipedia here under narrative journalism's history. And it literally says the definitions of narrative journalism are many and varied, but some prefer to refer to it as literary journalism or creative nonfiction. And so the creative nonfiction, simply put, narrative is the way in which a story is constructed through a particular point of view and an arrangement of events. So, great use of words, creative nonfiction, constructed through a particular point of view, so the point of view of the person writing it, and arrangement of events. So why do you have to arrange the events? You don't have to arrange the events. The events are what they are. They happen in a sequence that is real in life. You don't have to arrange the events. You don't have to put your biased particular point of view in and construct anything, or so that's interesting. However, if you continue to read, it says that there's several schools teaching learning the practice of narrative journalism, and it's very complex with multiple layers, and that it has the capacity to reform newspapers and make them essential and compelling. Broadly, some critical elements of narrative journalism include the following. It contains accurate, well-researched information and also interesting to read. It looks at intriguing people, human emotions, private story behind the public story, which is very interesting words to use. It reaches past the ordinary by blending the reportage of facts. Blending, that's a very interesting word. Blending the reportage of facts with the writing style of fiction. Isn't that interesting? So, narrative journalism is being used, and there's some examples on Wikipedia. It says today many nonfiction novels use narrative journalism to tell their stories. Print publications such as Harper's, the New Yorker, Esquire, Rolling Stones, and the Village Voice are also some welcome homes to narrative journalists. Now, and I'm not saying that these publications themselves are writing these pieces. Based on what I've seen in her documentary and what I've done the research on, it looks to me like these are private journalists that are going out, gathering information, and creating stories that are being published in these pieces. And to speak to her point, when she contacted them to say, "Hey, you edited this, you published this," the very first thing the editor said was, "Well, we didn't do it. The person who wrote it did." So there's definitely a problem. I have a problem with that. I mean, if like that's a problem. if the publication who is reporting the information is not willing to take responsibility for the reporter that wrote it, that they published for, I think that's a problem. regardless of what they're reporting about, period, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, I have a really big issue with that. So I guess, and I'll let you guys jump in here, I would really encourage people to make sure that what they're reading isn't narrative journalism or long form journalism, because if it is, and there's certain, I've seen, now that I'm aware of this, I've been really paying attention to my Facebook news feed, and some of the things that people are sharing are from some of these types of people who subscribe to these sources. And so it's very important. I mean, everybody's already saying, hey, what's your source, all that kind of stuff. But I think now, knowing this, it's even more important to know what the source is, because if the source is someone who's writing a narrative journalism piece, then that's not necessarily news. That's narrative journalism. And I think, again, just like the NLP, whether you're on the positive or negative side, whether you want to believe it or not, this is actually happening. This is real. There's schools teaching this. There's people graduating. They're going out, they're writing these pieces. They're going into magazines. It's all over the place. So narrative journalism is a thing. Whether you want to believe it or not, it is. That's unequivocated. So where is that in your life? And are you, is that what you're reading? Are you reading narrative journalism, or are you reading the news? And there is a difference. So do you guys sort of want to jump in on that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I was preaching.
That's all good. I love a good rant. What I was going to say was basically like the whole topic of the show is finding truth. I apologize for butchering this, Luke. But like about the concept of truth, and truth is a fascinating thing, because you could say that we don't know what is true. We don't know anything that is true. Like many physicists, even in today's world, are saying we have no clue how the universe works. And yet we have our, Einstein physics and thermodynamic people who believe in materialism, who believe that there's structure to the universe. And like my perception of what truth is, and this gets into another topic, is like to know something is to know the opposite. And the wonderful thing about kind of the politically driven world that we're in is like to know this thing from a left political perspective and to know the thing from a right political perspective is the most valuable, because we know how competing sides are going to connect with each other. And I think the dynamic truth is, my belief is there either is no truth or everything is true. And I lean as I get older towards everything is true. Like the schizophrenic person who sees a lion in the room that affects his physiology, as the anxiety of the media that we see affects our anxiety. That person's anxiety is real. That person actually thinks there's a lion in the room.
Yeah, you're right.
And there's not a lion in the room, but the person's physiology is responding is that there's a lion in the room. And I literally think this is true to the amount of tension that we can keep in our body. Like I think, like if people squeeze their bum really tight, it pushes their pelvis forward, and if people squeeze their core really tight, it pulls their pelvis backward, like in space. And I believe we have an infinite potential of how much tension we can create in our bodies physically. And this is illustrated through like hysterical strength of people lifting cars off children. But the point is that strength comes through creating co-contraction tension in the body physically. And I think that's the same when we start to discover truth. And these principles philosophically started in like ancient Greece with Socrates, when he said, we don't know anything. We only know that we don't know. And to know that we don't know is the most enlightened perspective. So this was Socrates' thinking. And he created the foundation for the scientific process. And the things that we do know in terms of that are actually valuable information is probability, statistics, actual reporting of numbers that have relevance to the issue that's going on, per like COVID, because like everything is getting spun right now. And the primary thing that we have are the materialistic models of science, are the data that comes in from these things, from the research, from these tests, whether they're good or not good, but they are statistical reporting. And we can do probability functions. Like we know that if you don't have any underlying health conditions and you're not old, this thing will, like, from a probability scale, not kill you. Like, you're more likely to get hit by a car than you are to die from this thing, most likely, statistically, if you are healthy and young. And that's a fascinating statistic when we start to think about the dynamics of, like, okay, so our politicians decide that we have roads. There's a certain risk that we associate with having roads. A certain amount of people are going to get into car accidents every year. This is a huge problem in the physiotherapy world. Like, so many people get into car accidents and they have to deal with physio and pain medication for the rest of their lives. And, like, we take certain risk in our society. And the main thing that I think when we look at any of this stuff is, like, the 4-letter word that no one wants to say, which is math. Like, do the math, like, actually figure out what's the risk of your current situation. And I'm talking, like, if you're in your 70s and you have underlying health conditions, you have shit to be concerned about. You should sanitize the bottom of your feet. Not actually, you don't necessarily need to be concerned about that, but you might. Like, if somebody sneezes on the ground or coughs on the ground, you step on it, like, could it be that infectious that it's going to come home? We don't actually know yet, so it could be. And should you be more concerned? Yeah, you should be more concerned. And that's like my perspective of it. And I think that concern doesn't need to come through the sense of fear. That concern needs to come through the sense of responsibility. That concern needs to come through the love of life and the fact that we want to be alive and we want to stay alive. We want to keep many people alive as we can, and it's going to serve the most people. And those are wonderful things that the underlying beliefs of our culture have created, and the fact that we have the luxury and the ability and the knowledge and the awareness to do it in today's world, unlike they would have been able to do with the Spanish flu, like, not even near to the degree of connection that we have. And all of this comes with a double-edged sword. And the fascinating thing with that is, like, all the good things that are allowing us to do this in such an effective way are the things that are the biggest threat to things like privacy and ownership and who owns what and the dynamics of these things. So it's like, that's kind of my take on it, is, like, everybody is going to have a different opinion. Everybody is going to have a certain complexity of opinion in the world. Can you, like, what measures of materialistic reality can you grab from that? Or is it just emotionally driven? And if it's just emotionally driven, like, control your own physiology and respond in the most appropriate way. And if that means turning off the news, that's just playing around with different concepts and making sure that you're getting, like, from an information standpoint, I think the main thing we need to be concerned about is numbers, like math. And that's the thing. I don't even like math. Like, don't get me wrong, like, math's not fun, but it's important. And the numbers are important from the standpoint of COVID. And the other thing to understand when you talk about NLP is, like, words are also important. Words are casting spells. So when you read these articles, which are, I talked about earlier, the polarization, like, they're creating these kind of camps of, like, people that are fighting against each other. That's just not the word or the narrative or the story. We all tell ourselves a story about our place in the world. Like, the reason that we evolved is because we could tell story. We sat around the campfire and told stories, and then we figured out theology. We figured out these concepts of God, these concepts of morality, and that all stemmed from not necessarily just language, but story and our ability to articulate these things. And that's what makes us such unique creatures, is our ability to tell our own story about the place in the world. And what's fascinating is that story, the story that we're telling ourselves about our place in the world, is being highly challenged right now. Even in terms of the dynamic of not being able to go within 6 feet of another person, not being able to hug another person. It's like public school, man. We had to fight for the right to hug people. Like, this is absolutely wild. And we don't have a way to protest for our fight to right to hug people, or the fight to right to hug. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, we know what you meant. Hey, Luke, do we have any questions? Not to cut you off, Justin, but we're already, like, we're getting on here, guys. Holy wow, this is crazy. Luke, do we have any questions with regards to anything we've covered thus far before we move on?
No questions yet.
Okay,
No
cool.
questions yet.
If anybody does have any questions, if they want to post either now or after the episode's over, we can reply back. We do have typically within every episode, we have a few people that reply sort of after the episode, and we get back to you. Cool. So a couple of the other topics were self-awareness and seeking falsification. I know, Luke, you were trying to sort of design. You had come up with that topic, and me and Justin were sort of like, "Oh, well, what were you thinking there?" You were thinking, something along the lines of, how you try to prove it to yourself. Like, what was that all about again? Sorry.
Yeah. So seeking falsification is just when you have an opinion or a belief, one of the most powerful things that you can do is challenging it. And then and also, again, going back to nuanced discussion and anti-censorship, is to have the ability and the space and a platform where you can actually be free to go about trying to prove yourself wrong, or to have conversations with people to try and get their perspective, especially somebody who is on the opposite side of the spectrum of you in terms of beliefs, or maybe political affiliation, or background, or race or religion, or anything else that you can do, because it's like an immune system. An idea that is good is going to be really resilient just on its own, in terms of it's not like a self detonating idea. So you basically, the strength, like right now there's a lot of stuff kind of built on a house of cards, which we see really kind of crumbling down. And that's like there's certain religions, or certain aspects of religion, or certain aspects of statism or government, that you're not really allowed to question certain things. You're not allowed to question certain ideas. And that's not because it's dangerous to us to do so, but it's dangerous to a bad idea. So in terms of like when you're trying to build your own picture of the world, it's good to really challenge what you think is true. And like Justin said, like like anything can be true, like everything can be true, or nothing can be true. And it's I found over the years that when I really get emotionally, especially emotionally invested into an idea, and I'm kind of afraid to explore it in depth, I generally have found that those ideas don't turn out to be great ideas. So it's just in terms of especially right now, because there's so many different theories, there's so many ideas going on in terms of what's going on, and what the virus is, or what the virus isn't, or what we should do about it, or what we shouldn't do about it. If you're gravitating towards a specific idea, or a specific measure, or a specific stat, even a number, is try and falsify it. Try and see where it's weak. Try and see if there's like if your source is a good source. Look. Try to go to the other side of the political aisle, or whatever. If it's not a political sort of thing, like go, like, basically talk to someone who disagrees with you, and talk at length, and get into the nuances of it. Because you may, and it's not about changing anybody else's mind, it's about changing your own mind. If at the end of the day you go through all of these steps, trying to falsify, trying to poke holes in your own theory, like that's literally what the scientific method is like you have an idea, and then propose, like what that idea is, and you basically spend a whole bunch of time trying to prove yourself wrong. Like that's essentially what the scientific method is trying to do. So yeah, like if Justin, if you want to, I'm sure you can wrap on that for a little bit.
Yeah, that's what good science is. That's what good scientists do, right? Like not all, like I think science's name is used in vain, if you will. Like we like good science is Einstein developing the theory of relativity and then trying to understand quantum physics, trying to understand time, the thing in which he figured out, um, to um, to prove himself wrong. And at the end of his life, he was even like, time is either like I forget which um, time is either an illusion or it's the most real thing that we know. And like he's constantly trying to prove himself wrong. And not all scientists do that. Scientists want to get published and they want to get grants and they want to do like all the money right now that's flowing into these things may or may not have an underlying agenda. Who knows? What direction is what research being pushed in? These are all very important things. And in the realm of truth, it's like I said, like either everything is true or nothing is true. And I think everything is true and you should act ignorantly. You should act like you don't know. You should act like you don't know people. And like these are some statistics for you in terms of things to look out for. Like in the modern world, in back in the day in the 70s, we would, if somebody thought that abortion was wrong and no one should ever have abortions, we would believe that they would, we could predict, maybe 10% of their other political beliefs. And in today's world, if we think, if I were to say, which I am by no means taking a position on these things, but like if I was to say abortion is terrible, no one should ever have an abortion, people then assume the rest of my political beliefs. So they assume that I have a certain stance on all these different things, and we play within the realm of these identity politics. And the fascinating thing in that regard is like we have to have some sort of metric or system in which we learn to structure our lives through, which is materialistic in its nature, and listening through people's actual perspectives and what they actually say. And we really need to come back to those things instead of just like flared emotional topics. And it is really like gaining control of your physiology, and even in terms of the stuff I teach of like being able to squeeze your core and your bone at the same time, like that is how you gain control of your physiology. That is how you teach your nervous system how to handle those tensions. Like that is what fitness is globally, is able to handle those tensions and the complexities that exist in our lives more effectively. And this is, if anything, a challenge to do that. Like this time is a challenge to manage stress that much better. Figure out, how you can create value for the world. Figure out how you can create value and help other people, and think about the future of work. Think about what the world is going to look like moving forward after this, and contribute and give your own heart. Because like my whole thing with Luke, which is a big fan of, is like the whole attention revolutions. And that like the next attention revolution is the attention that we place onto ourselves. And ourselves, like this, like, I look at things often from a chakra lens, because I appreciate the kind of archetypical representation of how things manifest in my life. But like, so what I see, even like with COVID, is the root chakra, which is the base of your pelvis, has to do with like security and family and safety. And everyone in our society, as soon as this COVID thing came out, dropped into the root chakra. Boom, I'm not safe anymore. What do I need to do? I need to go buy toilet paper to make sure my ass is clean. Because like there's this physical representation of the chakras in our lives, and like when we get sucked down into that safety. And I think the thing, coming back to my point, is like when we pay attention to ourselves, yes, safety is important. Yes, we have to manage safety across our society. Yes, this is an ideal of our society which we should totally respect, and we need to value the sensitivity of the healthcare system which we have in Canada. But we also need to make sure that we are living to our highest purpose, and then that is the narrative across our society, and that is the narrative, in my opinion, of being in the center of your chakras, which is the center of your being, which is your heart, and connecting to whatever the heck is in there, whatever you are yearning to do. Like, now is the time to focus your attention on that, and not what these people who are grasping at power want you to focus your attention on. And that is nature at its fullest. Like, who and what we are is the most complex thing in this universe that we have been able to observe yet. So why are we not spending more time focusing on the vehicle in which we are in? And like that needs to be the narrative of all of our conversations, and in my opinion, moving forward, and in terms of managing, digesting the media and trying to prove yourself wrong and trying to improve yourself. Because like, that's what it is. Like, when you prove yourself wrong, like Ryan, as an illustration, you get in a fight with your wife, right? You think you're right, you think she's wrong. Right? And it's like, what you need to do that's going to solve that problem is you need to prove yourself wrong. Like, you need to falsify yourself. And that skill in the moment of the stimulation of life is the most valuable thing in which we have. And what we're being challenged to right now, what we're being called to, is to stretch to a higher range of stimulation. Hey, I can handle this new range of stimulus. Hey, I can handle this radiation. I can stay grounded. I can stay connected to the things in which are me. And that is most fundamentally, again, your own body, the things that exist within it, and the complexities that are there.
No, you're right, 100%. And it's interesting you say it that way, because as I said in the earlier part of the podcast, like me and Luke been doing a ton of research on all kinds of different things, and as I'm sure many people have, and as I tend to share some of this with people, I can tell really quickly which ones are prepared to receive it and are prepared to sort of go to that higher place, and which ones are still completely closed off from it and just don't want to know, start making jokes about it, or or whatever. And I know right away. And so, yeah, I mean, the more people that sort of venture out of their comfort zone and start looking at, how can I be better, a better human? I mean, that's really one of the fundamentals of how this, again, I think I told it in other episodes, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, one of the reasons why we're doing this is because my original thing when I was going to do this university talk called Be a Better Human was that I fully believe that people spend more time learning how to drive a car than they do about how their heart works. And, heart disease and heart failure and heart attacks is the number one killer in North America. So, I think it's really interesting. I was talking to a retired respiratory therapist today about this, and we were just sort of quickly discussing it. And I just think it's interesting that as humans, you're right, we don't research the vehicle nearly as much as we should. Some people not at all, in any real heavy capacity, which I think is so interesting, because we want to make sure that our sons and daughters know everything about driving a car so they don't crash, to go back to your point earlier of like, the fact that more younger people have a chance of getting hit by a car or getting in a car accident for that matter. But I think it's interesting that we put more emphasis on not getting in a car accident, learning how to drive a car, than we do on how our heart works and what we can do to help our heart survive and not negatively affect it. So that was a fundamental thing of my talk originally, and part of how we got here with Be a Better Human. So yeah, you're preaching to the choir, man. It's literally a fundamental thing that I think everybody should be doing. Not only now, but forever. I think we need to definitely take the time needed to understand who we are as humans and what we're here, what we're physically here to do, and how we can physically be better. It's what me and Luke and you are obviously, and many other people who are connecting to us, are so passionate about, is that we are this incredible species. 8.7 million species on the planet. We're just one of all of the incredible species, and we barely began to scratch the surface of who we are, and let alone talking about, like you were saying earlier, about the universe and what that is, and trying to possibly quantify or understand all of that is something that, most of us are never obviously going to be able to do in our lifetimes, but we can start somewhere. And I say this every episode. Every episode I say, listen, you got to start somewhere. What are the starting points? How do you take one thing and start? And I would say that for people listening, they should start with something that is very, affecting them right now. So if that's anxiety, or if that's cancer, or if that's, wanting to get your driver's license, all of that stuff is, very important. The driver's license piece is important. You should focus on it, but what are some of the things that are related to getting that you can focus on with your body, right? How's your vision, right? Go get your vision checked. And there's all of these kinds of things that, like, I know people in my immediate family that probably should have prescription eyewear right now, but they don't. And so, I think it's important for us to make sure that we understand our body. How is our vision? How is our hearing? I mean, me and Luke are in the sound business. I don't know if I've ever had my hearing tested, to be honest with you. Like, so I'm like the first one to put my hand up and say, hey, yeah, I could be better with that. Like, I mean, for years I didn't wear earplugs. Now I have custom ones that I had done on, but there was, in the early years when you're young and wild and crazy, you don't think of that stuff as being important. And so for anyone young who's listening, it's very important. And you should, definitely do some research on your body, because you've only got one set of hearing, and
Permanent nerve damage. It like a very mild, like loud tone, like your cell phone played at full volume is permanent nerve damage to your hearing. Yeah, it's very easy to damage your nerves. And then
and this stuff isn't like, people shouldn't fear this stuff. They should be excited about the fact that they can learn it. Right. And I think that's something I want people to take away from this episode. We've talked about a lot of truths here. We've talked about a lot of things, and we've been very real and raw about it. And this isn't to, just so everybody knows, this isn't to scare you. This is to inform you and enlighten you and make you aware, consciously in front of you, right? Look, aware of what's going on right now in your life consciously, because it's happening subconsciously. Like, it's happening and you're just taking it for granted. Just like, me moving my hand right now, I just take it for granted. But that's what it is. Some people don't have a hand, so those people don't take it for granted at all. But I think the thing that this has taught me, again, I speak from a place of experience. This has taught me that there is a lot of things going on in my life and in my family's lives and my friends' lives that we all take for granted or have been taking for granted. And this is a big wake up call for all of us to go, whoa, wait a minute, as a species, wait a minute. We need to slow down for just a second, and we need to start better understanding exactly what's going on here, because only then do you have an informed, can you make informed decisions, right? And I think that's important for us as humans. We need to, as much as possible, we need to understand, and we need to take ownership of ourselves, take ownership of the responsibility of even being human, right? Like, you didn't just show up, get taught a bunch of stuff in school, and then your parents, off, see you later, of course, which I'll be doing that one day with my daughter, but it never ends. Any parent will tell you that never ends, right? Just because your kid goes off to school and they start their life, or, a lot of moms out there, when, and I guess it's both parents technically, but, I know, because I'm a male, I'm speaking from the perspective of my mom, I'm watching my mom is a rock to me. And I've always, and I watched sort of as I got married, that my wife all of a sudden came in and became like this sort of main female influence on my immediate life every day all of a sudden. And my mom wasn't necessarily that person as much anymore. And so I think that this is something important that people need to realize, that as time goes on, you need to make sure that, you're keeping these people close to you, that you're continuing to understand that everybody, that feelings matter. Like, feelings matter. Your gut matters. Your gut has direct connection to your brain, period. And it matters. And I think that people need to understand what that means. If you don't understand what that means, that's a big problem. And you need to figure out what that means, because people say, oh, I have a gut feeling. And then you don't listen to it. And then, all of a sudden that stock goes up or that promotion goes to someone else or whatever it is. Oh, I had a feeling that was going to happen, and you are what you believe. So if your gut tells you something and you don't listen to it and you believe, it's not going to happen, probably won't happen. Right. So I think it's important for people to, make sure that moving forward that you are self-aware of what's going on in your life, and you are enlightened and you are informed and you do ask questions and you do research. And like to speak to your point, Justin, you do research the other side's point. And I think that would save a lot of marriages. I think that would save a lot of friendships. I think if people understood the other person's perspective, because again, I say it in every episode, I think all opinions are valid. So even if it's only valid to that person, right, it's still valid to them. So it's still a valid opinion. But I think that people need to understand, you're right, they need to understand both sides, because only then can they truly see what's really going on in the full perspective. So yeah.
You have to see positive to see negative, and you have to see the other side of the coin. Like, yeah, like there's a lot of people out there trying to convince their families that the world's being run by a wild pedophile ring. But we, even beyond that, we still have a lot of problems as a society that we need to fix. Like,
sure.
it's not like we need to. There's still this religious war going on, in a sense of things, of like Islam versus Christianity in many regards. And we need, like, the key thing that's most important is we still need to come together as a global society under some sort of better vision of ourselves, and make sure that isn't too tyrannical of a system.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And I think this is helping. Honestly, I think this is helping. I think this is making us all realize that we're all human, right? We're all human, regardless of what you believe. We're all human, and we all have to look out for each other, right? And if we don't, the virus ain't looking out. The virus is looking for us, but not looking out for us. So I mean, as humans, we have to look out for each other, and we have to come together, now more than ever before. And in the future, definitely, this, every 10 years or so, we have a pandemic or some chaos that happens in our lives. And so, uh, I, for one, for sure, am going to be better prepared, for the next one now, having gone through this type of thing. And we talked about it in previous episodes about the World War II, right? I talked about this with my grandfather. He passed away now, but he was in the Canadian military, and he was in World War II. And, me and my cousin always talk about it, that we forgot to, not forgot, sorry. We just, we weren't really men. We weren't adults when he was alive to really have serious conversations with him about what it was like and what he went through. And I'm, I'm trying to document what's going on in our lives right now as much as I can, and time capsule it for, so that I can make sure that, because while they didn't have the cell phone cameras back then, we do now. And so we can teach the future generations, right? And teach our sons and our daughters and our grandchildren and so on, what we went through here. And so we can try to be better all around as humans, right? Learn from our mistakes, whether they're, things we believe in, or things that we weren't doing correctly, or, things we were taking for granted. But it all starts with one thing. So I think everybody needs to pick one thing. That's the takeaway from today's episode. For many people, they just need to pick one thing, start with one thing, and then two, and then three, and then four. But start with one. Pick one thing that's important to you, that you want to do research on, that you want to figure out the other side on, and go after it. And I think that's a good segue to our final topic, which is how to stay informed while maintaining mental health and clarity. And I think that's a big piece, is make sure that the information that you're receiving, that you're looking at both sides, right? That you're looking at all the information and making, and only doing it that way. Because if you're constantly looking at one side, Luke, you're right. Like, there's algorithms, AI algorithms, who people have paid billions of dollars to create, that are driving that to you, because statistically they're going to make ad revenues because you're going to just dive deep into that, whatever it is you believe in. And based on everything you've clicked on and liked and shared and so on, they know what that is. The AI, the computer knows what that is. It's no different than when you're buying on a major online global retailer. It's a big supercomputer that knows exactly what you bought, when you bought it, what color you bought, who you shipped it to. They know all of that. That's a computer. And they analyze and they go and they create a profile for you and go, there's a good chance that if they bought this at this time of year, this color, that this thing that you're selling, we can market it to them and they're going to buy it, right? Or this service, they're going to buy it, right? And that's happening. So that's happening from a commerce standpoint, but it's also influencing you in other ways, right? It's being utilized. AI is being utilized to market to you with your bias in mind, and not allowing you, therefore, to do what Justin's saying, which is to understand both sides. So, I think that that's the first thing that we need to start doing is, maybe not so much social media because of that, and start branching out into other places where we can get our research from. And I honestly, the best one for me has just been talking to people who have great life experience, right? Like people who actually have been through war, people who have actually been through what goes on in an ER, what goes on in an ICU, what goes on the front lines of everything. Like if you want to know something about flying a plane, you should probably talk to a pilot. And if you have the opportunity, you should probably talk to someone who's a flight instructor, right? Or someone who manufactures planes for a living, right? Chances are they've made a few mistakes. So it goes to speak to anything in our lives. And I think some people take this for granted, that you can just hop on the internet and search for something and get all this information, and not always are you getting the full picture, right? To speak to your point, Justin. So do you guys have any additional sort of ways that people can get information while getting a clear, concise thing, and not negatively affecting their mental health?
I'll touch on that. I would just say, like, why are you getting the information? So I think what's most important in this is like that I would even think about from the whole spectrum of the episode is like the power with something like NLP comes down to where you give your focus and your attention. And if you're giving your focus and your attention to the image in your brain that is bad, or the image in your brain that is good, you're going to get either one of those outcomes. And that's kind of the premise of it all. And the main thing that I think is so powerful with that, when it comes to truth seeking and these types of things, it's like we have to figure out what excites us and what gets us turned on about life and makes us want to move forward and share our gifts with the world. And we need to find the things in which are going to lead towards more truth in that regard, not necessarily in COVID regard, or any of the kind of popular media that is on today's world. I don't think Facebook is all bad. Like Ryan gets to share his kids and document this wonderful journey of his life, which his kids may be able to digest at the end of Ryan's life and learn that much more about him, and his grandchildren learn that much more about him and who he was when he was however old Ryan is. So I think like when you go about trying to find truth and maintain mental health, the main thing that you have to be focused on is why you're even looking at these things. Are you looking at them because you're depleted in dopamine, and the way in trying to satisfy your dopamine depletion is by scrolling on social media? And that's not going to do very good things for you. But if you are saying, okay, this is something that I'm passionate about, these are people that I value their opinion and their values, even if they're discussing modern day things of COVID, like you need to listen to those people. You need to listen to these firsthand experiences. And through that, also know that everyone has their own emotional bias. Like my wife is a frontline worker. She has worked with a COVID patient. And like, you got to get all geared up when you work with a COVID patient. And when you get all geared up, your body gets stimulated, you get excited, you start to feel fearful. So these ER doctors, through their accounts, they are accounts of fear. And those are important things to remember as well. And can we peel back the emotion of that, not by discounting it, but by appropriating a vision of what's actually going on in the world. And again, I think the narrative that is at least playing out in Canadian culture is like the government basically had to scare us because we didn't trust them and they didn't trust us. So they had to make it seem, even in terms of their policy decisions, it's so bad, it's so terrible. And that's still the dynamic that's playing out. We still don't trust our government and they still don't trust us. So like that's could that change overnight? I hope, I wish, right? But it's not going to. Um, maybe in some grand multi different dimensional universe, but like I think it's important that we develop in our, at least in Canadian society, trust within our relationships with the people that are deciding the policies and the direction of our country. But yeah, like you need to find out why you're even looking at this stuff and why it's important to you, and
And
then decide what you want to focus on.
And I think there's different levels to it too, right? So I wouldn't, I'd caution people with any kind of generalization, right? Because like I know me and Luke personally, like we know certain people who are in, government, and they're good people, and they are doing good things, and they are, so, I'd caution people with regards to that is that, not every human is created equally, and not every person who's in a position, this goes for anything, this goes for corporations, companies, manufacturers of products, governments. Not every person who works for someone is in a position to 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 tell the whole truth, meaning they're not in a position to release certain things without something very negative happening to them, or um, they may not even know what's going on, or they may not be um, they're not in a position to be able to tell us everything or to be able to change everything. I know so many people that uh, run for government or run for promotions, and then it's like the grass is greener thing, right? Like they get there and then they realize that there's a whole, again, a team, right, of people and a system in place, and sometimes those systems are slow moving, right? And as an entrepreneur, like that drives me insane. Like I go, what do you mean? Why does it take so long? Like in Canada, we were desperate for PPE. I can't even count on every orifice I have, and every, I got a record collection there. Every record I own, like I I can't even count the amount of entrepreneurs that just jumped up and put their hands up. Several of them are watching this, going, "Hey, I'll help. I'll get you some PPE. I'll find a way," right? Because that's what we do as entrepreneurs, right? We solve problems. But what you realize really quickly is that not in all cases, when you're an entrepreneur and you have your own business, or when you're just starting a business and you're lean and you can move and shake, it's different. It's just different. I see it from the other side. I've had the privilege to work, not volunteer and work, helping a music committee here in London, and I've got an inside look now of how these systems are and some of the ways they operate, and good or bad, they are what they are. And if you don't understand them, then everyone out there that's going, "I don't understand why," that's the point. You don't understand why, because you don't understand. You need to understand. And when you do see it, you'll go, "Wow, that could be so much more efficient," or "Wow, I can't believe they pulled that off," or, whatever it is at the time. But my idea of how some of these systems functioned is very different now from what it was before I had a chance to see on it. And a lot of it's not hidden, people. Like, you can go online and you can view, I know our city here in London, they have a YouTube channel showing every single city council meeting that's ever taken place, and you can go and watch them all if you really want to. Um, and I'm not certain if every city has that, but I'm just saying that you know, in a lot of cases they have this stuff published on their websites. So the information's all there. You can see how the processes are and how the systems are when these things happen, and when people are trying to get things passed into legislation or all this kind of stuff. It's all there. It's all hiding in plain view. It's all right in front of you. But if these compelling things keep taking your attention away to the left or the right, you're going to have a really hard time seeing what's right in front of you. And I think that's the truth that we all have to sort of, and I definitely have been spending an incredible amount of time looking straight in front of me and absorbing as much information from all sides as I can, because I think it's important that in order for me to have mental health, positive mental health, and to know that the world is going to continue, the world is going to be a good place still, I needed to understand, I needed to know as much information as I could so I could make rational decisions in my life, because it seemed like when this all started, there was nothing rational about any of it. And yet over time, people have gone on TV and said things that are rational now. And then other people go on news media or social media and say things that aren't rational. And then, so you're right, Justin. And it's just kind of a constant back and forth that if you understand both sides, you can see the picture much clearer. But if you're constantly biased to one side, and it's very difficult. And I'm the first to admit that I've been there. I've been that person years ago, that, you know, even from just getting simple for a moment, even just from the perspective of like sugar, right? I talked about it in previous episodes, but like, I didn't know what sugar was. I thought I knew. It's like this white stuff you put in your coffee, right? Like, that's what it is. You just don't know. You think you know, but you don't. And you're ignorant to the fact that once you do figure out what it is, you're like, I don't understand how this can be. Like, this is crazy. And yet it's not crazy, and it does exist, and people continue to use it every day. So we need to be informed. We need to definitely not just sit around and wait for someone to tell us what we need to know as humans. We need to go out and start a quest of knowledge and learn. It's one of our pillars here: live, learn, love. You know, again, without those three things, it would be very, very difficult for us to continue as humans, right? You know, in this vessel, we need to live, and we need to love, and we need love, especially right now with as much fear and negativity out there in the world. And we need to learn. Just continue to learn as much as you possibly can, absorb as much of it as you possibly can, and it's only going to make you a better human. It's definitely, there's, you know, I can't remember who said it, but you know, there's no such thing as losing with knowledge, right? You can only win, right? There's just no such thing as losing, because you either learn something that's right, or you learn something that's wrong, and you can avoid it in the future. So, paraphrasing a bit, but that's what, you know, that's what I believe now from everything that I've started to read. And I say our journey is long. There is a tremendous amount out there, and you guys both are incredible wealths of knowledge. And thank you for sharing more of that with us tonight, Justin and Luke. That's
Welcome.
yeah, man.
Pleasure.
And with that, is there anything you guys want to throw out there before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'd like to just touch a little more on staying informed and keeping a sound mental health and mental clarity. It's like anything else. It's a skill that you have to develop over time. I've seen, you know, like on social media and stuff, the rare times that I'm sitting there scrolling through, mostly to be doing research for the show, is you know, like now people who have never done an ounce of real sort of research, or they've never been taught how to do research, whether that's clinical research or not. But one of the biggest things that I see right now, it's sort of a catchphrase, is like, well, what's your source? Or like, is that a peer-reviewed study? Or different. They're throwing around different terms that they don't necessarily actually know the meaning of or how to approach it. Like if I were to put out or not put out, but if I were to share a study that's a peer-reviewed study in a journal, would most people even know how to open that journal, and would most people know how to actually read that journal? And the answer, of course, is no, because most people have never looked at a peer-reviewed study before. They don't know how to, and I'm by far not an expert on this, but I remember several years ago, sort of like looking into that again, like trying to falsify my own position on something, because I was one of those guys saying, like, let me see your source, let me see your peer-reviewed source, let me see the journal. And so someone really kind of schooled me on it, and they showed me a journal. I'm like, holy shit, I don't even know how to open this thing. Like, I have no idea how to read this thing. I'm asking for something that I have I have no idea how to actually interpret the data or look at this. And I think, that's something that we need to leave to professionals to do. And it's not like you need peer-reviewed double-blind studies to make a decision on something. Like, different drugs or different techniques or different this and that we can do to help our situation with the virus. You don't like, we're barely into this thing. There's not going to be major peer-reviewed, massive participant studies that are done. And guess what? We need to make decisions quickly, and these decisions are going to have life or death consequences for different people, and they're going to have major consequences in terms of overall physical health and mental health, but also in terms of economic health. Like, there's so many different decisions that we need to make. And what people are doing, like when you see the flare up of emotion coming to the table when we're trying to have these nuanced conversations, when you see people who get all get upset about somebody just because they have an idea, because they have a suggestion, because they have a different perspective, that, hey, this guy, he's got a bad idea and we need to, like, who gave this guy a platform? Why are we even listening to this person talk right now? And this doesn't just go for people like you and I. This goes to, I'm not going to name specific names, but major political people, major political leaders are being turned off of the news because the news media is trying to spin a different narrative. And the fact that it's like, it's literally, you can watch these people in their reporting, these so-called journalists, like, it's an emotional reaction that they're having to a situation. And like, if you're tuning into that kind of stuff, again, like Justin said, like, you really have to know why you're tuning into these kind of things. Like, are you tuning into this because you are making a decision tomorrow whether you're going to go to the grocery store, whether you think it's safe or not, or whether you're going to keep your business open, whether you're going to, like, I know, Ryan, you're doing deliveries every day. You're, like, seeing different people every day.
Yeah, a lot of it's just dropping parcels at the door, but yeah.
Yeah, but like, there's a certain amount of risk that you're weighing, and you're not, like, if you were literally just going by sort of mainstream media and fear-based news, you would have shut that whole business down right from the get-go. Like,
Yeah.
it would have been, like, this is where you have to make, like, this is where the nuanced conversation comes in, and like difficult conversation. Like, this is really easy sort of conversation because the three of us are generally in agreement here. But and maybe we can do more of this thing in the future, but bringing on people who have the polar opposite point of view. I'm not going to stake a position right now, but there are people who, essentially think the entire thing is a hoax. I don't necessarily think the entire thing is a hoax.
No,
I think
the virus is real.
Sorry, Justin?
I think it's a really good joke. Like, to imagine some like diabolical Bill Gates character sitting in a room laughing at the state of the entire world, be like, these fucking idiots fell for this virus prank. This is the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Yeah.
No, it's a real virus.
Yeah. And like, there's, again, it's like it's difficult conversations that I've had in private with people, like challenging what they're saying and challenging what I'm saying, and talking to people on the front lines. And like, there's a ton of information out there. And if you again, it's a confirmation bias is something that we all have to deal with. Like, I personally know that I'm extremely biased towards certain positions. So I know that if I see a piece of news or I see some information, and right away I was like, damn it, I knew that was right. Like, I always have to catch myself and go, whoa,
Listen
whoa, whoa,
to your
whoa.
gut. Listen
Whoa, whoa,
to your
whoa.
gut.
Give me, like, let me try and see what the opposition is saying about this. Let me at least get their point of view, because right now, this makes perfect sense to me. But there was a specific video that I was sharing with a couple nurse friends and a doctor friend of mine. Basically, I sent them the video going like, hey, there's a doctor, more not a research doctor, but a frontline doctor, who was looking at it going, hey, that there's a possibility that they've not even really genetically determined that this virus is a real virus and what it is and all these other things. And that there's, these, not to get too technical because I'm not a doctor or biologist, but these exomeres that are a natural reaction to stress or EMF or bad diet or, a common cold or a common flu, like a million different things. It's basically just a regular, biological response of the human body in terms of the immune system. This is what they're actually testing for. And this is why there's so many false positives, and there may not even be a virus. And it's an idea that I had looked at, this is quite a while ago, quite a few weeks ago, but I'm looking at it going like, okay, well, if like, I never really took the angle of there's no virus to begin with, but looking at, like, just sort of playing like devil's advocate to myself, going like, is there any truth to this? Like, are we literally just testing immune response to stress? Like, is there some sort of validity to that? And I think there is a little bit of validity to it, but at the same time, another friend had pointed me to a different doctor who refuted that specific video about the exomeres being that there's no virus and it's all these exomeres. And he went very, very deep and, super technical into it, far more technical than I can, I'm not a biologist. I can't falsify it myself. So I had sent both of these to a number of people going like, how do I make sense of this? Because there's, on the one hand, someone who's saying that there may not be a virus at all. But on the other hand, there's somebody else saying, hey, there's some truth to what this other doctor is saying. But the fact of the matter is, we actually know about 7 or 8 different variations genetically of this virus. We know 100%
Wow.
that irrefutably there's a virus out there and it's very contagious and it is killing people and it is causing different complications. So while at the same time, you can't just buy into the entire official narrative. You can't just say, oh, this doesn't exist and be cavalier about not protecting yourself, not protecting your family, not protecting your neighbors. Again, it's one of those things where I'd spent probably a good solid week on it, just trying to figure out where all of this stands. And there's a number of people, very controversial and very mainstream people that were talking about this at the time. And, it was one of those situations where again, I'm not losing sleep over it, but I want to be informed in terms of like, okay,
Yeah.
well, how like how crazy do I need to be in terms of, like Justin says earlier, like disinfecting the bottom of your feet because you stepped out on the back porch for 5 minutes. Like there's a huge spectrum of how we can mitigate potential issues with bringing a virus into our home or interacting with different people. And on the one end of the spectrum is like you're never leaving and you're never going to be within 50 feet of somebody else, and your hands are going to be raw from disinfecting all things all the time and washing your hands like a madman. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's literally people going, hey, you know what, my God is going to protect me from this, so I can go lick this wall or lick, do whatever these ill-advised things to do. Like there's a whole huge spectrum. And the idea, again, going back to what Justin was saying about why are you looking for this information, is because if you're making a real life decision in terms of how deep you want to go into mitigating the virus and washing and sanitizing and distancing and all of these other things, you need to know what the probabilities are of these this virus getting into your life and how it's going to affect you. That's where you need to, again, like you're not making a rash emotional decision in the moment and flaring up and making your opinion known to everybody on social media. You're taking into account a bunch of different sources, one on one side, one on the other. And you can, even if you're not, like, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not particularly interested in biology to begin with, so I don't know a lot about it, but I can find people who have history, and they have, they have a history of being correct. Like the two people I was looking at in polar opposite of each other, I had been following right from the beginning of all of it. Both of them basically saying two completely different things, and both of them actually being very right about all of it. But at the end of the day, if you know kind of how to research, and you're not allowing the uh, emotional manipulation, whether it's conscious or not, on the part of those talking about it, if you're not letting those things get the better of you, then you can take all of the information and weigh it out and come up with probabilities. Again, you have to do the math. Like it's not like I was sitting there on a calculator specifically punching in numbers, but I go, okay, well, here's this position and here's this position. Well, this position, there's a lot of, let's say a lot of truth to it, but there's also some conclusions being jumped to that there's a space there that I can't really, because I'm not a biologist, I can't bridge that gap. I can assume that because this guy's well qualified and he's a doctor, that he's bridging that gap, and I'm going to take the result of it as being truth. But on the other hand, there's another doctor who's very well qualified as well, who's not leaving any gaps to be bridged. He's walking it from step to step to step to step. I go, okay, well, at the end of the day, for me, and it's not an emotional thing, but at the end of the day, this is a more compelling argument So again, I would love for this whole thing to be like, oh, we were just gravely mistaken here. And there's actually nothing really to worry about. I would love for that to be the case. And I know that I'm biased towards that sort of positive optimism. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I have to go, well, shit, the doctor who's really, really laying this out really well, who's making an extremely compelling and rational argument, I have to go, hey, as much as I don't like this being a reality, that's who I'm going to listen to. And that's where I'm going to make those decisions in my life. And I'm not going to just go, hey, you know what? I have immune system issues. So I'm maybe a little more overly cautious than what I would even suggest to a lot of people. But, when I'm making a decision like, okay, well, how many times in a month do I want to go out into public, say grocery shopping, and expose myself and potentially bring something into my house? If I'm of the opinion that this is a nothing burger and I don't really need to worry about it at all, I may mess up and bring the virus home and get my family sick. And again, I'm not worried about doing that regardless. But if you're not challenging yourself and you're not, spending the time, like I know everything seems like a crisis and an emergency in these kind of situations. But again, if you can breathe and give it some room, and again, I took a solid week of talking to people on the front lines and sharing this information and asking questions, not telling them that this is what I think is going on, but rather asking them, going, what do you think of this? Because I'm not qualified, but to me, this makes sense that this is actually like a major testing error. And that's a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've done the same thing. I've found a couple of videos that I thought were super compelling and I sent them to some people on the front lines. I did the same thing. And I got, a number of different things back from them. And I think it's just part of the quest, right? It's part of the journey of trying to better understand what's going on. And I think that's something that me and you are definitely heavy into, and Justin, you as well. But not everybody is, which I recognize. And so for everybody that's watching, I think a lot of what you're saying, Luke, is that people need to just make sure that they're referencing both sides in and taking the time to do that, making sure that they're seeing the clear picture. And I think that's, we've touched on that a lot tonight over all the different things we've talked about, is just this really important thing of making sure that we understand all sides and all variables, because I don't think anyone is going to question that there's more than one thing going on right now in the world. Yeah, it's sure there's a pandemic, and yes, there's a there's a virus for sure, but there's definitely other stuff going on right now, some of which isn't even necessarily making it to the front lines of the news right now. Like there was a fire near Chernobyl, and like that made it kind of to the front page of some news, you know. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the world right now, whether it's related to this or not. I think it's all valid and it's all relevant, and to a certain point, and you need to check it out. But again, going back to what you both said, uh, you're right. Do you need to be checking this out? Well, what is the purpose of it, right? Like, because we talked about that, right? Self-awareness and life purpose and all that. And we've talked about it in previous episodes as well. And I think it's important for people, if you are going to go on a quest for research, like, Luke and I have, it's important to have a purpose for it. And I think that's what you guys were both speaking about. And if it's just plain self-interest, then I think that's when your point of making sure you understand both sides of the narrative is very, very important. Otherwise, it's not necessarily an enlightened journey, right? And I'm the first person to put my hand up and say that, when this all started, I was very much not aware of a lot of things, on both sides of the fence. And the more and more I continue to go down this journey of self-enlightenment and self-awareness, I'm starting to learn that how to take control of my life, how to become a better human. And I think that that's fundamentally, again, why we're here, is to help people learn how to learn how to live, learn how to, and from our experience, right? And from the experience of the people who are having on this show, like yourself, Justin. And yeah, it goes without saying that, every human out there, again, I say it always, I think there's a good part in every single person in the world, somewhere inside them. And I think that good is coming out right now in a lot of people, and they're trying to figure this thing out. And everybody's at a different part in their journey of figuring this out and learning. So whenever I come across someone who doesn't share the same opinion as me, um, I look at that and go, you know what, that's valid, and I should look at that. Kind of going back to what you were saying, Justin, right? I should look at that and I should understand it, because if I don't understand it, I can't really have an opinion on it. It's just that simple, right? And I think that that's just good. That's good reporting. That's good science. That's good human, like, for lack of better terms, being a human. That's just what's good about being human, is that you have the ability and the choice to learn both sides, and you should learn both sides. Otherwise, it is not a truly informed opinion and view that you have of what's going on in your life consciously.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think I think we're at a point now where we really need to start, like the self-falsification, or trying to prove yourself wrong, or trying to prove your points wrong. I think we need to do that on a really, really foundational level, in terms of what we of systems that we use right now, systems that we all sort of rely on and lean on and believe in terms of, like a really good documentary to watch, specifically about media and different perspectives on the media, I'll say, is a movie called Hoaxed, and it's Mike Cernovich is involved with that movie, and I think Stefan Molyneux and a bunch of other good people, and it really, really illustrates what's going on. And like, I guess I'll pose a question, which is kind of in the film, is like, what if like literally everything you've been told by media was a lie? Like, what if, and like, you can go back to even like Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, who wrote the book Manufacturing Consent in 1988. So in Manufacturing Consent, they really go over in terms of how the media is used by different lobbyists and government and different entities that are like, they really have become extremely good at steering the narrative. And like, there's like, if today is the first time that you're learning about like, there's like, literally a patent, and I'm trying to just pull it up here really quick. So there's a patent, and if you just search Google patents for nervous system manipulation by electromagnetic fields from monitors, this goes back several decades, and it's a patent basically explaining exactly how you, or whatever entity, can use different pulses of light, or different frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that actually will come through your monitor at such an amplitude that it does, like, this is all very, very old settled science, is that you can literally manipulate in real time somebody's nervous system through the television, which they've been using for decades. And then just the idea that neurolinguistic programming is something that's been around for a long time, that most people have never known about, and that the marketing and the media companies all of these agencies are very, very well tuned into NLP. And you have to ask why you've never heard about it. And like, again, like NLP is one of those one of those technologies that can be used for good or bad. And it's one of those things where even if you know a lot about NLP, it's like one of the reasons that I really dislike watching any sort of television is that even if I don't think it's a nefarious source, is just because of I know the power of hypnosis of television, and I just don't like being put in a suggestive state. Like I like it, but it's like a nice relaxing, it's like nice and relaxing to sit and watch TV sometimes, but I don't like being put into that suggested state or suggestive state without, like it's like you can still be aware of what's happening to you, but it's still going to be working on you. So it's one of those things where, again, like you can go into these things with knowledge and awareness, but it's such a powerful technology that it can still, even though you're aware of it happening in the moment, there's not a lot that you can do to protect yourself from it. Aside, like, that's again why I do not watch television. And like about the only television that is on in my house is something like The Wiggles on YouTube or something like that for my son. And I'm sure there's definitely some hypnosis and suggestions going on there, but it's quite a bit different than watching CNN or Fox, or watching different press conferences and stuff like that. So
I was gonna say, even in terms of like what I think is most important moving forward is like, what do we want our narrative with nature to be, and what do we want? Like, what I see it manifesting with now is like we're spraying the ground with poison, we're walking around with rubber on our feet, we're disconnected from this natural world. Like, you could go so deep into conspiracy theory that like you could say the nature of fluorescent lighting has confused the human nervous system from a standpoint of non-natural electromagnetic frequency, and we're so out of sync with the earth and the sun and the rhythms in the universe that we don't understand our own physiology, or we're so disconnected from our own physiology. And the main thing I think we need to really focus on is like, just for ourselves, like as individuals, what do we want our relationship with nature and the natural world around us, including other social beings, to be? And we need to be the ones that are guiding that narrative. We shouldn't be giving the responsibility of that to other organizations, to media outlets. Sure, these things are entertainment and can be used as such. I see one of the biggest threats to this thing as the younger generation, as the generation of high school students who stay up till 5 a.m. because they're staring at a blue light, being hypnotized by the light itself. And their circadian rhythms are getting all messed up, and like these are big, huge implications of kids not being in school. And like, I remember me and my wife were talking about this earlier, just a little side note, but like, did your parents ever tell you to not sit close to the TV?
yeah.
Now we're all like 6 inches in front of our face, like there's a screen in our eyes.
Yeah.
And it's like we're like blind monkeys to this stuff. It's like, didn't you see it coming? Didn't like, don't you look at history and see the dynamics of this playing out? And we have to make sure that we are using these technologies as tools for creating our higher purpose. And I think that's going to be the thing that's going to combat the depth of the darkness and allow us to enter into a new stream of light, which is a brighter light than all things that are dark. And call me idealistic in that sense, call me optimistic in that sense, but I think that will be the nature of our world if we decide to take ownership of the relationship that we are shaping with the natural world around us and nature, and especially COVID. Like, we can't tell ourselves horror stories about our own immune system. That's the story of COVID killing us. We can't tell ourselves stories about fear of virus and viruses, because we coexist with thousands of them, if not millions of them. And we have to make sure that we are talking to ourselves in an appropriate way, because our cells, the RNA, which it has been illustrated through the scientific process, to that our thinking can impact our RNA in the way in which it codes. And this virus is a thing that takes over your RNA. So what kind of relationship do we want to have with our own RNA? And these are all very important aspects when we think about what do we want our relationship with nature and the natural world around us to be. And
And that,
if our bodies are just the world that is around us, I think
mm,
we need to get serious about taking a willful control and guidance to that system and that mechanism.
for sure. And I think that's one of the positives that's come out of this whole thing, in a sense, whether it was planned or not, was, the fact that so many people right now are, you know, going outside with their kids in their backyard and connecting, with each other and putting their feet on the ground. And, like I bought my daughter a slide, we bought our daughter a slide, and, she's going on a slide in our backyard. Right. And she loves going on the slide. And, so there's these things that, like, normally, I'd be at work all day, every day, and my wife would be at work all day, every day. And, we wouldn't be having that experience with our daughter, in out in nature. So there's definitely some positives like that, where, whether planned or not, the universe is, forcing us to take a time out and saying, hey, you need to slow down, you need to connect with each other, you need to connect with nature. And so
Connect with yourself.
yeah.
Like it's again like becoming healthy and getting a hold of your gut microbiome and the vagus nerve, and getting a hold of your nervous system, getting a hold of your brain and your mind and your mindset, all of these things. Getting a hold of the idea that it's comfortable to falsify your own arguments. And just to kind of wrap up here, like that's what being a better human being is that we need to, like, if like these are very important subjects and topics that we're broaching here. And like it's all well and good to have all of the research and have the sound mental health and the clarity and all of this stuff. But if we're not good at sharing these ideas, and this is something I'm constantly working on myself, is learning how to make your point and how to make an argument, and learning how, like again, NLP is one of the most powerful and most comprehensive ways of changing the narrative, changing somebody's emotional state, changing somebody's physical and mental state, is using these technologies and learning how to make an argument. Like there's a great book by Stefan Molyneux called The Art of the Argument. And it basically it goes into all of the different ways that people win and lose an argument. And it goes into ways in terms of like how to make a valid argument, and how to refute an argument, and when to know that somebody is making a valid point, and when somebody is using hyperbole, or they're making a straw man argument, different techniques that can be used against you and used for you, and different ways that you can use these techniques to like to get your truth out there to other people. All of it comes down to again, like knowing and learning how to use this vessel, how to use this amazing fractal antenna that resonates with so many different things in the universe, how to tap into all of that energy, and how to have a clean antenna, how to have your chakra systems working, all things that I am working on myself, how to have your nervous system working properly, how to have your immune system working properly. All of these things are being really highlighted right now, in terms of, okay, like everybody, not everybody, but most people have the space to work on these things explicitly and work on them consistently every day. Like that, I can't think of another time in history in terms of my lifetime where collectively we've been put in a position where we can all work on these things together. And hopefully that, like if tech companies and governments and people in general get behind the idea of being open and uncensored and giving people a platform, that I think we can, like in a sort of decentralized fashion, all of us can come together and weigh out the probabilities and make micro decisions and macro decisions that can get us through a situation like this and can get us through easily, a lesser sort of, a less negative situation. Like right now it's pretty dire for some people, or it seems to be anyway. But again, like, we can use all of these things to our advantage and really recreate a world that's not built on so many lies, that's not built on such a system that's basically a giant house of cards.
Yeah.
Like we have, like, now is the time to, like, that's something that we're working on really diligently in the background, is a system and a platform where, like, right now we have to kind of, we're trying to avoid certain, not avoid, but like we're trying to use our words very wisely right now, in terms of the fact that we know that these systems that we're using, these platforms are, like, it doesn't take much to get censored or shadow banned or banned or,
All keyword driven.
yeah. So there's certain keywords that we're trying not to trigger. But at the end of the day, we would like to have a platform where we can feel free to speak, in uncertain terms and not mince words. And I think that's something that we can build going forward.
That's amazing. Yeah, Luke, it's we talk about it all the time. Is that in the Constitution of the U.S. and in our in our Constitution here and everything you have going on here in Canada, I think one thing that all humans share is the ability to have a voice. We all want to be able to speak our opinions, because again, all opinions are valid. So yeah, I agree, man. I think it's important that we all continue to be able to speak out for what we believe in. The theory that, again, I never got to speak to my grandfather in depth about what he did in World War II, but the theory behind that was that we were going to war for freedom, right? That we were going to war for a country that believed in freedom and believed in all of the rights that we have as humans in these countries that we're in. And not in all countries in the world do some of those things exist. So we have to be conscious of that too. We have to be conscious of the fact that we have certain liberties and certain freedoms in certain countries, and those things didn't just come by default. Like there was over time in history, if you've done any history research recently, I know certainly I've done an incredible amount recently in research into history, into human history and world history. um, and I now better understand how we got to where we are, as a country in Canada and as a society across the world. I did a lot of research into the European history and Roman history and Chinese history and American history, Canadian history, and so on, British history. So rabbit holes, and trust me, there's many of them. You really start to enlighten yourself as to how we got to where we are as humans, and at least in the last couple thousand years. And when you do that, I can tell you from experience, it is an incredible, enlightening experience. If you really get into it, and not everyone will or does, but if you do, if that's something, if understanding where you came from is important to you, I would, my challenge for this episode is, learn some of that. Learn what's relative to you, even if it's as simple as going and learning your own family tree, right? Knowing your family's lineage, right? Where did you come from? I mean, so many things I've learned about my own family trees, because I have several of them. So many things I've learned about, the fact that, my dad's like, oh, we're from this country, and then all of a sudden it turns out, a couple, 1,000 years ago, well, we're actually from a different country. So, there's lots of, there's 23andMe, and there's all these sort of things that you can do. But ultimately do the research, do the research yourself. It's part of the journey, right? And part of this quest is for you to do that research on your own and figure out, what is your history, how did you come to be here. And I think that's important, because as they say, you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. And so I think it's important for everyone to know as much about their history, so that you can have, an informed opinion going forward. But that's my challenge for this episode, is do some studying on your history, and where you come from, and where we come from as humans, and what we've done in the last couple thousand years, because we've done some incredible things, and some of which I wasn't even aware of. I wasn't taught in school. So, but anyway, we need to wrap this up. So thank you so much, boys. Thank you, Justin, for coming on this podcast again and sharing with us your wealth of knowledge. Luke Westlake, thank you as always for taking the journey with me here at Be a Better Human. And thank you both again. And everybody out there, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and watch and tune in. If you have any questions beyond this live episode, please post them in the comment section on the platform that you're watching on, and we'll be sure to get back to you on some answers to some of your questions. And in the meantime, everybody, live, learn, love, and be a better human each and every day. Be well, everybody.
Bye, guys.